Hello there, everybody. Hallo zusammen. Welcome to this German GCSE and iGCSE video tutorial. So in this tutorial, we are going to look at nouns. A noun being a person, place, or thing, of course, by definition. Every single one of them in German will have a capital, but we're going to go into a bit more detail and look at how to find out the gender of nouns and some tricks for learning the plurals of nouns as well. So I'm going to take you through, try and introduce you to a lot of the patterns and shortcuts. So it should be useful for any student of German GCSE. Firstly, I'm Dhananjay Talwar. I studied modern languages, French and Italian specifically, at the University of Cambridge for my MA degree. After graduating in 2015, I've been in the field of education. And I've spent most of that time actually as a full-time tutor now, which I've been doing for at least 6 years. I'm really passionate about languages and language learning, as most people can tell pretty much instantly. And I've learned more than 20 different languages to different levels, of course, but that includes at least 9 to fluency. German is one of those. And I did German myself for GCSE very successfully before practicing and improving it with the help of friends and so on. So learning languages is a big part of my life, something I really enjoy doing, something that is actually in reality always likely to be a real hobby for me. And I love transmitting that passion and motivation to my students, making sure they understand how to learn languages well, efficiently, but while also making it a lot of fun at the same time. And I love seeing them hit their goals, including target grades in GCSE exams. So I've helped more than 500 different students to achieve or even surpass their target grade for GCSE or iGCSE language exams as a tutor. I've taught 8 different languages to GCSE level and a few, or some of those at high levels as well. Okay, so let's go on to the German GCSE and iGCSE exam boards. You should ideally be aware of your exam board as early as possible in year 10, if you can be, and try and then tailor your preparation accordingly to make sure that you're not just learning generic GCSE German or iGCSE German material, but you're encountering the kinds of questions that you will face in your exam. Please also be aware that the syllabus, the formats for specific exam boards, they do change over time. So it is useful to check the website for your exam board once you know which exam board you're taking. And to make sure what the latest format is, try and make sure that you're aware as closely as possible of what the exams are going to be like for you to maximize your preparation. Okay, in this video, though, we are, of course, exploring German grammar. And German grammar will very much be relevant for all students. So everyone can benefit from the things that we're going to go through here. So keep on watching. Doesn't matter what exam board you're doing. This should still be useful for you. And I'll share towards the end details of how to get in touch if there's any questions or anything like that. But let's start with nouns then. So a noun is, of course, by definition, a person, place, or a thing. I would incidentally say that those kinds of definitions, they're not actually required for any modern language for GCSE or iGCSE exams, but a little bit of an understanding of grammar can really help. Even knowing the things like definitions of nouns, verbs, adverbs, adjectives, and so on. A little bit of knowledge can really help, although, of course, students, other than myself, of course, which is perhaps an exception, but most people do find that slightly duller. But it can definitely be useful. In German, of course, all nouns have to start with a capital letter. You'd always capitalize the first letter for every noun, not just for proper nouns, so not only for names. That's, of course, the case in English. Nouns will start with a capital letter if they're names of people, places, or things. But in German, every single noun starts with a capital. And if you're writing in German, you must remember to add that capital letter at the beginning. Otherwise, technically, it is wrong. And if you do that very consistently, if you miss them very consistently, you could lose a mark or two. German nouns also, importantly, have grammatical gender. This is grammatical gender, of course, So what this basically is essentially a category that each noun will fall into. Every German noun will fall into one of three different categories, either masculine, feminine, or neuter. It's got to be one of those three. You can only get up to three grammatical genders in a language, I believe. Yeah. Yeah. So many languages will have no gender, like English or Mandarin Chinese. Some will have two genders, masculine and feminine, such as the Romance or Latin languages, French, Spanish, Italian, and so on. And many, such as German, Russian, and others, would have three, masculine, feminine, and neuter. So, yeah, three is the maximum that I've come across, definitely. And that does make it a bit harder because every time you learn a noun in German, you must try and memorize the gender too. There are a few shortcuts, which I'm going to show you as well, which can help to make that process easier. If a noun has a certain ending, those endings will often be associated with a particular gender. And sometimes those endings in themselves will give away what gender that noun is, whether it is masculine, feminine, or neuter, which actually hugely can reduce the amount of learning that you've got to do. But do make sure to learn the gender for every noun. Do make sure that you're aware of that because you need to know the gender to be able to use it correctly in speaking and in writing. And we're also going to look here at plurals. German nouns form their plurals in a variety of different ways. Again, this is another way in which German differs from English and in which German is just harder than English, really, because in English, most nouns, the vast majority, will form their plural with an S at the end or equivalent to that. In German, unfortunately, there's quite a few different ways to make a noun plural. To go from one book to two books, or one table to two tables, one cup to two cups. You've got quite a few different patterns there. So in German, unlike English, every time you learn a noun, you should really memorize its gender and its plural. And all of that information would actually be given to you in a dictionary, for example, whether it's an online dictionary, a paper dictionary, whatever type or format it's in. A dictionary will normally indicate something like they'll often have a letter like M for masculine or F for feminine or N for neuter to show you what gender the noun is. Some dictionaries may use the German versions instead, männlich, masculine, weiblich, feminine, or neutral, I believe, for neuter. And they will also indicate in brackets the plurals. So if they have brackets and then a dash n, for example, in the dictionary, that means that to create the plural for that noun, you simply add n at the end. If they have in brackets a dash with an umlaut with two dots over it, that means you simply form the plural by adding an umlaut onto the final vowel of that German noun, and so on. So there are at least 5 or 6 main ways in which German nouns can form plurals. There are potentially others too, but 5 or 6 main ones that tend to be most common. And you must make sure that for each noun you identify, how you know how to form the plural for that particular noun. And again, there are definite shortcuts that can help with this, as I'll reveal. Okay, we're going to start with gender first. So there are, of course, exactly 3 different grammatical genders in German: masculine, feminine, and neuter. The way I would think of these grammatical genders is they're very much grammatical genders. So they're part of the way that the language is formed, they're part of the language's grammar itself. So they're essentially categories. Every noun has to fall into one of those 3 categories, and each of those types of nouns or categories of nouns have slightly different patterns. They behave in slightly different ways. And the words in front of that noun, adjectives, the articles, the word for the, or an, and so on, they will go into different forms, which are often dictated or partly dictated by that noun's gender, and whether that noun is masculine, feminine, or neuter. So that's why it is so important to know what gender a specific noun is in German. And there are definitely patterns or shortcuts, which, by the way, are often overlooked. Many students will just rote learn, so they will simply learn the gender of every noun one by one. That's not, that, of course, if it works well for you, definitely give it a go, but it's not the most efficient method because you can learn generalizations or general tendencies For example, nouns ending in UNG will be feminine, nouns ending in CHEN are neuter, and so on. And that can hugely reduce the amount of learning time required to memorize the gender just by learning those patterns or shortcuts instead. So each and every German noun has exactly one of these three genders, of course. Grammatical gender, and this is something that many people find confusing, grammatical gender is actually not necessarily the same as biological gender. Um, what that means is the word for a boy is not necessarily masculine, not in every single language in the world. The word for a girl is not always or necessarily going to be feminine. Um, yeah. And yeah, grammatical gender is not the same as biological gender. So even objects like a cup, for example, that will have a gender, which is not necessarily going to be neuter. It's not the case that biologically masculine things are masculine gender, biologically feminine things are feminine gender, and objects or things which don't have a biological gender just become neuter. Unfortunately, it isn't that simple. Things like a table would be masculine, for example. There are many. Flower is feminine. There are many different patterns. Objects will often be masculine or feminine too. And one example of this is where this can be potentially confusing or misleading is that the word for girl in German, which many people would assume is feminine, and indeed, normally the words for, say, boy, man, husband, and so on, those tend to be masculine in most languages. The word for woman, wife, girl, and so on tend to be feminine in most languages with genders, but not always. So the word for a girl in German is actually neuter gender in German. That is simply because of the ending, CHEN. Not for any other reason. So the girl in German would be das Mädchen. So be aware of that biological gender and grammatical gender do not necessarily match up. They can help you to identify grammatical gender, but not always. It's not a foolproof rule. Okay. There are, luckily enough, though, some patterns that do make it easier, that really can help to tell which gender a particular German noun is. These endings, for example, really strongly suggest that a noun is masculine. The ending er, the ending en, the ending ig, ich, so ich, ling, like Frühling, for example, spring, or the ending or. And these tendencies generally are true. There can be some few exceptions, but the majority of the time, these tendencies, these patterns do hold true. So they can really help accelerate the learning process. Other endings strongly suggest that a noun is feminine. That should definitely say feminine rather than masculine for the middle line. These endings are UNG, height or kite, HEIT, KEIT, I or EI, shaft, SCHAFT, ion, ION, tit, TA with the umlaut T, and ik, IK. That is a very strong tendency in German. The vast majority of words with these endings, UNG, shaft, for example, ion, will be feminine, with very few exceptions, if any. And once you've memorized that, that can reduce your time to learn the genders of nouns, which, as we've said before, is very important to know, considerably, hugely, really. You'll come across many nouns ending in ION. A lot of them tend to be quite similar to the equivalent in English, actually, which again is a real shortcut. And they will almost always be feminine in German. Shaft or kite, height, these are very common endings applied to German nouns. Often in German, to form a noun, you would simply take, say, the adjective or a different part of speech and add height or kite or shaft at the end. It happens extremely commonly and often in German. And every time you come across those endings, you can generally assume that it's going to be feminine noun. Not masculine, but feminine. And these other endings strongly suggest that a noun is neuter. CHEN or chen, like we saw before, line, LEIN, ment, MENT, tum, TUM, and UM. So this is a real shortcut to make the learning process much easier. So if you look for shortcuts or generalized patterns like these, That is one trick to really help with learning a foreign language, including German for GCSE. In the plural in German, luckily, there's no distinction by gender, which means that all nouns or adjectives, for example, in German, if they're in the plural, they all have the same pattern, regardless of whether they're masculine, feminine, or neuter. There's no distinction at all based on gender in the plural in German. So that is a bit simpler. There aren't as many forms to know or to revise in plurals in German. There are other tendencies as well that can really help. Days of the week will be masculine every time in German, for example. Months will be feminine. Months will also be masculine. So these tendencies can really help and simplify the process. If you simply know that every day of the week is masculine, you don't need to rote learn them. You don't need to go through every day of the week and memorize the gender for every single one of them. You can simply learn this rule instead, which greatly helps. You don't have to memorize all of these endings given here either, and all of these tendencies. You'll see these in many nouns. As you come across more and more nouns, you'll see these endings quite commonly, some more commonly than others. If you memorize the main ones, or whichever ones you feel able to retain and remember, that will really help. Whichever ones you're able to memorize, that will really help the learning process. So you don't feel like you have to memorize every single one of these endings for it to be useful in any way. Even knowing a few, for example, that the ending ung is for feminine nouns, or that the ending chen is for neuter nouns, that really helps in itself. Okay, now we move on to another tricky aspect of nouns in German, which is the plural. So plural, of course, is talking about describing whenever there's more than one of something. Generally people will learn the singular form first, because that's the form that, is in the dictionary, for example, the standard form of a noun, like the Tisch, the table. And they will then have to learn separately how to make that noun plural in German, because unlike many other languages, in German, there are quite a few different ways to make a noun go from singular to plural. And every noun, of course, will apply a specific pattern. So you have to memorize, for every noun that you learn, you have to memorize what pattern it requires to make it go from singular to plural, because it changes from noun to noun. There are, again, common patterns here that really simplify the process. For example, nouns ending in ung will generally form their plural by adding a further en at the end. That's pretty much always the case in German. And if you do learn those shortcuts, it can really, really make it simpler, make it far less material to actually remember. So don't underestimate the power of these kinds of shortcuts. That's what I would do if I was learning myself, for instance. But these are the most common ways to form plurals in German. Adding an E at the end, so adding the letter E at the end of the noun. For example, der Tisch, the table, becomes die Tische, the tables. Adding the letters ER instead. For example, das Kind, the child, becomes die Kinder, the children. Sometimes you can also add ER and add an umlaut onto the final vowel of the noun as well. So das Buch, the book, becomes die Bücher, the books. It's quite common to add an umlaut onto the final vowel in German, in a German noun when forming the plural. Adding an N or EN, for example, die Blume, the flower, die Blumen, the flowers. Generally you'd add only an N if the word already ends in a vowel. But if the noun doesn't end in a vowel, if it ends in a consonant, then you'd add en if it has that particular type of plural. Adding an S, just like we do most of the time in English. For example, das Auto, the car, die Autos, the cars. Quite a few foreign words do have that pattern, for example. So again, that's something of a shortcut. Adding an umlaut on the main vowel or the last vowel of the noun only, without changing anything else. For example, der Bruder, the brother, die Brüder, the brothers. Notice the difference in pronunciation. It is important to try and be as clear as possible about how the umlaut changes pronunciation when it's on each of those vowels, A, O, U. And sometimes you come across nouns in German which actually do not change in the plural. For example, das Fenster, the window, becomes die Fenster, the windows. No change whatsoever to the noun itself. Those last ones, when there's no change, can definitely seem simpler. There's nothing that you've got to remember or memorize. But in a sense, you do have to memorize that there is no change. You've got to memorize still that there's nothing that changes. So the difficulty here in German, really, in plurals for nouns, is remembering which nouns have which pattern. Yeah, and for that, if you are struggling with that, first of all, particularly common nouns you will start to see again and again. The more often you see those same nouns, especially in the plural, the easier it will be to remember and to memorize what the correct plural is. Because after a while, you'll realize that, say, das Kind, die Kind, or die Kinder with just an E at the end sounds wrong, and so forth. So it must be something else. It must be er at the end that you add on, for example. Or die Tischen just sounds wrong, so you simply add an e to make the plural for the tables. With familiarity, that comes more naturally too. But there are other tendencies that will really help. For example, nouns ending in ung will basically always add another en in the plural. Many foreign words will add another s in the plural. Yeah, there are quite a few other patterns. Yeah, if we go back to the previous one, a lot of these feminine types of nouns will simply add en at the end. That's going to be the most common way to form the plural. Yeah, and memorizing those tendencies will really help and will hugely reduce the learning time. So do look out for those as much as you can. Okay, now I'm going to test your understanding of nouns and their genders and plurals in German a little bit. So, firstly, how many grammatical genders are there in German and what exactly are they? Quite an easy one, I believe, to start off with. Let me show you all the answer then for this. Yep, there are 3 grammatical genders, of course, in German: masculine, feminine, and neuter. You definitely need to be aware of all 3 of those for GCSE. And iGCSE, that's, yeah, a fact that everybody will need to know for these kinds of exams. Question 2 is true or false. All German nouns change in some way in the plural. Okay, we looked at the plural, yeah, more recently, so try and think back to whether German nouns must change in some way in the plural or not. And let me show the answer for this too. This one's definitely false. There are some German nouns, Fenster, for example, was one example, a window, that stay exactly the same in the plural. So you don't need to memorize any ending or change whatsoever. You just keep those nouns the same. But it is important to know which nouns that applies to, of course. Then number 3, true or false again. Every noun ending in ung in German is feminine. So we went through gender a bit earlier. And yeah, try and think back to the specific endings and the genders that each of those endings were associated with. Okay, I'm going to show the answer. This is actually true. All nouns that end in ung are feminine in German. These rules can really help to memorize genders of nouns efficiently because there are actually loads of different nouns ending ung in German. It's a very common ending for nouns in the language. So these are not just theoretical shortcuts, they'll practically really help to memorize genders of many nouns at once. And lastly, number 4, why is it important to learn the gender and the formation of the plural for every noun that you learn in German? Students might well be tempted to skip this kind of information because it is time consuming and not that easy to learn because of the number of patterns. Okay, I'll show the answer then. Both of these, both the gender and knowing how to form the plural, these are important for every noun that you learn in German because it tells you how to actually use that noun, especially in speaking and writing when you have to produce, you have to come up with the German yourself. But even for more passive understanding and skills like listening and reading, they can help you not to get, say, confused if you recognize the correct plural ending of a noun, you can easily tell that it's in the plural, for instance, which can actually affect your answers and the marks that you get. Okay, if you've got questions about anything at all here, or if you'd like to know about more personalized help and classes, which I do provide too, you can get in touch with me by email, via Facebook, or Instagram. Now, I post on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn almost every day, trying to share my love of languages with people, hopefully motivating them to learn more languages and giving them fun ways to do so, fun methods and techniques like some of these that make the process more efficient. I do post a lot about exams, including GCSEs too, and I offer quite a lot of help on things like exam technique there. So do check all of those out and give me a follow. And I do have many free resources available as well, including for German GCSE students, which should be very helpful. I do one-to-one classes, group classes, courses, and other help in other ways as well. So if you'd like to know more about any of this, just get in touch.